On this episode of the Audio Visual Podcast, it's the radio personality, Bromo.
I've never seen so many people nowadays get into the radio you don't have to go to broadcasting school, especially behind a tanning salon like I did. You know, if you really love radio and you are fascinated by what it can bring you, but if you are so engaged with another person and the personality comes out over the air, your own personality, and you start having people recognize that, it's quite the cool thing about the job.
3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Audio Visual Podcast, a podcast where you can get in-depth interviews with broadcasters, marketers, streamers, gamers, small and large business owners, and more. The podcast that shows everyone has a creative side, no matter what career field or hobby you do. Well, we're at another episode of the Audio Visual Podcast, and I'm your host, Kyle Dean, and we have some awesome guests throughout the podcast, but this one is the most awesome guest, I would have to say. At least for this episode, I would have to say. It is one of my good friends, and then also one of my great coworkers that I've had in the past, and he's still rocking the radio business. It is Bromo. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm well. How about you, buddy?
I am doing very well. You know, it's another day, I would say, of learning all this podcasting stuff, since my podcast is relatively new and everything. But I'm super excited to see where it goes, just trying to learn all these fancy doohickeys that happen in podcasting.
I want to ask you real quick, when we're done with this, you'll give me a place where I can go and see some of your past work?
Yes, I can do that. No doubt. I actually have for everybody listening right now, I've actually created a website. So it's audiovisualpod.com. And Bromo, I'll give that to you right after the interview. No doubt about
Excellent.
that. First off, you know, Bromo, we should let you introduce yourself here, because Bromo, is that your real name? It has to be, right?
My real name is Dave.
Yep.
And the reason why I'm called Bromo is because a long time ago in 1998, I hooked up with a morning show, and the main host, his name was Dave, so they came up with Bromo out of the whole thing, because you couldn't have two Daves on the show, and it stayed with me ever since.
And it fits so well, it just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
Kind of like Cher. I'm kind of like the one that, you know,
so
Bromo Cher.
You want to hear something funny? I interviewed Allison. You know Allison. We know Allison really well. She said the same thing. She's like, just Allison. It's just like Cher. And so that's hilarious that it's kind of
she
that. She
stole my line. She always does that.
And she's going to tune into this and be like, oh, Bromo, I'm going to have to call him and talk to him a little bit. Yes. So we're going to just break down, you know, your radio career here very shortly. And we'll talk a little bit about your podcast too. But I should say, Bromo, before we do any of that, I have kind of a new tradition here. I guess it's, you know, a young podcast, but I've always done rapid fire questions with my guest, and just get to know you a little bit better. It's always fun, a little icebreaker. So are you ready to do some rapid fire questions?
I'm ready, but I'm not that quick, so my rapid answers won't be that rapid.
All right, so they'll be fire questions. I love it. Okay, let's get going. First off, easy peasy. What is your favorite color?
Oh, blue.
Blue. What is your favorite food?
Lobster or steak, or both.
Lobster or steak. I love it. What is your favorite movie or TV show?
Rudy.
That's a good one. Love that one.
Yeah.
What is your go-to karaoke song, or what's your favorite song?
I don't karaoke. I did it one time, long time ago in San Diego, and I was drunk as hell, and I think I clucked to American Woman. I do a clucking noise, and that's what I did. I went on stage and I ruined the song for everybody, but I do not karaoke.
Do you have a favorite song, though, at least?
I have a bunch. That's just too many to... Probably,
that's fine. Yeah. And that's a good thing. You can't just have one sometimes. What is your favorite game, either a board game or a video game or any game?
Video game on PS5, a bunch of them, but I can't really narrow it down. I play them all.
Okay, yes. And you actually got a PS5, huh? Because those were hard to get for the longest time.
Well, I got ripped off on the internet for $650 and I got my money back. And then I found somebody selling it here in Bismarck and I got lucky and I've had it ever since.
Oh, nice. Well, I'm glad you got one and playing some games. And that's what I've been doing lately too, is playing some games too. There's so many that came out. The next one that has stumped a lot of people. What is a good spy code name for you? Brominator. Okay, see, that was easy for you. I loved it.
Kind of like Terminator, but a little bit skinnier.
I am the Brominator. What is your go-to lazy dinner?
Actually, steak is very easy to make for me. I used to cook a long time ago, so steak.
Yeah, that would make sense. Would your 12-year-old self think you were cool?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Yeah, that's what I've heard from most of my guests, yes. Would you rather sleep in late or take a long nap at midday?
That's a great question. Probably sleep in. I can't really take a nap these days. My mind goes crazy, you know?
Yep. And I know you used to work morning show just like I did too. And
you did.
Yep, that's why I enjoyed those midday naps just after a long morning. Long morning? Yeah.
You have one or two kids now?
I have two now, so that's why it's so naps are very good.
You don't get a lot of sleep.
No. Not at all. Not at all. And then my last question for rapid fire questions. Who is your hero?
That's my best friend in San Diego, the one that named me Bromo. His name is Dave Rickards. He's just recently retired after 33 years of doing the same morning show. Can you believe that? 33 years.
In San Diego.
In San Diego, yep.
That just seems unheard of at 33 years at the same station.
Yeah,
radio.
They're an icon show out there, and they just recently retired a couple months ago, and people are crushed out there.
Wow. Well, congratulations to him on it. Hopefully retirement that he can enjoy. And if he's listening right now, that's quite an accomplishment. So good job, sir. Yeah. That was easy. Easy peasy. You rocked those, Bromo. You had no problems at all. So before
my brain doesn't go too quick, Kyle, but I appreciate those were great questions, by the way.
Thank you. Very simple. I asked the same 10 to everybody, just a good icebreaker. Now, Bromo, before we get started here, actually, let's just get started right now. And you and I, we worked together for, I think it was about a couple of years or so, at the same station doing early mornings. You were on the rock station. I was on good old classic country, the news and information station. But it all started before North Dakota. So can you tell us about your journey, I guess, in radio? How did you get interested in radio to start things off?
Well, my dad had a booming voice. He was a school principal, and he had a booming voice. Everywhere he'd go, people would ask him if he was in radio. And I still have the wimpy voice crack voice from time to time. And I remember one day he called me in the living room, and he had looked at an ad in a newspaper and said, "I think you should go. I'm going to put you through this." It was called American Dream Broadcasting School, and he signed me up, and I was the only student during the daytime. And I'm not kidding you, Kyle. The school was in the back of a tanning salon in Ocean Beach, California, down by the beach.
Okay.
And I was the guy's only student. And we went through those horrible old used college books that were all tattered and torn that he bought fairly cheap, and we had an old Radio Shack mixer where I put together a god-awful air check tape, and 6 weeks down the road, I graduated but never got my diploma, and I got mad, and one day, and I asked him, I said, "Where's my diploma?" And he got tired of me asking him, so he went in to the station that he was working at, and he said, "Do you guys need an intern?" He said that in the morning show, and they had never had one before. And so I became their first intern. As you know, Kyle, a lot of times in radio, internship is probably one of the best ways to get into our field, because you learn right there in the radio station everything from going across the street to getting these guys coffee, to doing all the grunt work, to trying to hear everything and learn everything. And just from there, I started doing this and that, and I worked for an AM station in San Diego, and then I met my best friend in 1998, and that's when he started calling me this Bromo figure. And I was on their show for 10 years, from 1998 to 2008.
Wow. And it's just the journey of internships. I think that's still important for many career fields, not just the radio side, but getting your foot in the door has always been the biggest thing. If you know what you want to do, getting that foot in the door is very important. So 10 years in San Diego, that must have been a fun time, no doubt about it, with that morning crew, huh?
Oh, well, see, I was there, the guy that took all the beatings. I was the guy the fall guy. I was the guy that went out and paid off bets on the air. I was the guy that went out and did embarrassing things back when radio was very different.
Yes.
And we would perform our bets on the air. Some pretty
some interesting.
Yes.
Yes.
And I did that for 10 years. I was like their whipping boy.
Oh, man.
But I loved it so much because my personality could come out over the air. I was a loser, a guy with no dates, a guy that lost in golf, a guy that just was lousy in high school, and that came out over the air, and they made a character out of me. And I was basically able to be myself for 10 years until alcohol gripped me by the throat. But I'll tell you, Kyle, when you're doing live radio and you have an audience show up wherever you're at paying off a golf bet, and I'm listening to my friend on the phone tell me what to say, and we're on the air through San Diego, it's probably, as you know, when you make someone laugh or you make somebody become wide-eyed and they come up to you later and say, that was great. That's the biggest high, besides back then when I drank, was the biggest high in my life. Still is, actually, the high part, the entertaining people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So you were kind of the class clown in a way of the morning show that did all the
stunt boy.
The stunt boy. And you probably did some insane stunts, because you said radio totally different than what it is right now. No doubt about that. And can I ask what was one of the craziest stunts, or what comes to mind of a stunt that was just mind blowing?
Yeah. Back in 2000, the San Diego Chargers started out 0-10, and my friend and I are playing golf one day, and he goes, guess what you're doing on Friday? And I said, well, I'm sure you're going to tell me. He goes, you're going up on a billboard, and you're not coming down until the Chargers win.
Oh, my.
I said, you want to tell me that? You want to tell me that again? And then he told me, and then 2 days later, there I am. They're hoisting me up on a billboard 51 feet up in the air. Basically, I was on a scissor lift crane right next to the billboard.
Yeah.
And the crane was pretty wide and pretty long, but it was 51 feet up in the air, and I had to stay up there and not come down until the Chargers won. And I was up there for 10 days when they finally won, and they lowered the crane, and all the news people were there.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
wow.
It was crazy.
Yeah, that does sound crazy. Chargers were not good then, back in the day. No.
No.
Speaking of San Diego, I know we've talked sports many, many times. What's your favorite teams throughout for whatever sport? There you go. Yep, he's pointing to his hat. San Diego. You got it. The good old Padres. Yes, the Padres. So
I love my college team, the Aztecs. I follow the Padres. I am not a Charger fan. Once they moved to Los Angeles, it was adios.
Yep.
See you later.
Yep.
I hate everything LA that there is. No offense, Los Angeles people.
Yep.
But it's kind of like North Dakota State and the rivalry in North Dakota.
Yep.
UND, right? It's kind of like that rivalry, right?
Yes.
So I'm very loyal to my Padres and my Aztecs of San Diego State, and I follow them out here.
Yeah, I see.
But I do like to go to some Bismarck Larks games out here, some baseball, and it's I like Bismarck a lot. I got to tell you though, Kyle, I really miss Minot.
Yeah,
I miss it so much.
Minot is still a good old Midwest town, just like Bismarck, but it's a little different than Bismarck, just by not just population wise, but culture wise. I think you would say too, in a sense. People. Yep.
Everybody sometimes makes fun of Minot, and I don't know why. I've always cherished Minot, and when I was living in Minot, everybody said, "Wow, you should go check out Bismarck. Bismarck's got everything." And I don't necessarily think that that's true. I think Minot to me was such a nice home, and I was there almost 4.5 years.
Yeah.
Isn't that something how fast time flies?
Yeah, and I can't believe it. But now, so you came from San Diego, then you went. So what was after San Diego? Was it Minot then? Did you come up with the Minot?
No, I was out of radio for since 2008. I got laid off along with 2,000 other people nationwide. This was iHeartRadio.
Okay.
And then I had to go take care of some serious stuff I'm sure we'll talk about, some health-wise.
Yep.
But I got back into radio in 2014 when a country station out in Castleton, North Dakota, I used to work with these two guys in San Diego, found me and had said, "You want to come out to Fargo?" Now, keep in mind, Kyle, I had been in San Diego almost my whole life. Mm-hmm. I had never seen snowfall. Mm-hmm. I had never been in weather below 35 degrees on the plus side. So I remember when I took the job and I had a plane ticket waiting for me, 2 days before I was going to pack up and leave, I put the movie Fargo in, and I lasted about 10 minutes, and I paused it, and I went, what am I doing? Because you and I know, and everyone else knows, the opening scenes of Fargo is so dreary and miserable and cold, and it's not really Fargo you're seeing. Of course, you know that.
Yeah.
So I get into Castleton, and the first time I saw a snowfall, I stopped in the middle of the street, and I was in bewilderment, and this policeman pulled over and said, "Are you okay?" And I go, "Yeah, I've just never seen snowfall before." And the first time I saw what minus 20 was like, good grief. So I lasted there for a year, and thank God I was looking around because I had just been there long enough, and someone from Grand Forks suggested that I apply for the position in Minot. And I remember, Alice, remember this, our first interview on the phone was 56 minutes long.
She would remember it probably.
And she told me, she said, I remember, Kyle, you'll remember this. She says, this is 2014 now. She goes, the first thing I want you to do is look up Minot housing because it's extremely difficult to find a place to live out here. Mm-hmm. If you get hired. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know that. That was just after the oil boom had ended, right?
Yes. Yep. And then it was like right after the flood, too. So everything was still in the repair process, I guess you would say.
Probably one of the greatest days of my life was when I was driving back from Grand Forks. See, I lived in Fargo, but at that time I was able to get my weekend shift back in San Diego on the air, which is an iHeart radio station. There are no iHeart radio stations in Fargo, so in order for me to record my weekend show, I had to drive to Grand Forks where there was an iHeart radio station. And I'll never forget that phone call when Allison said, "Well, just want to let you know that the job is yours. I'll give you I'll take it. I'll give you I'll take it. I'll give you till Monday to think about. I'll take it." I was so excited. I'm telling you. Have you ever had a phone call like that, Kyle, when something that you've really looked forward to and hoped for happens? Isn't it the most glorious feeling?
Yeah, no, I think I have. It's probably been so long now, but I would say that it's just one of those things. But one of those, the one I would always take the time to think about it. But you're just like, let's go. And Allison was like, okay, let's do this. And I know it was a great 4.5 years in Minot. I got to work with you for 2 of those years, no doubt about it, in the morning, roughly on that. And then, from Minot to now Bismarck, which I've listened to your show every time I'm in Bismarck because now...
No, you don't.
Yes, I do. I am not kidding. And it's different because, first off, from early mornings to midday afternoons, that's probably got to be a change for you.
Well, I have to admit, being able to sleep until 7 o'clock was a God's wonder because, as you know, when you do mornings and you wake up at 4 o'clock, and you know what? People who say, quote, "Oh, you know what? You get used to it." No, you don't. You never, ever, ever get used to getting up that early. Ever. Right, Kyle? I mean, you adjust to it.
Yep, and you want to hear the funny part? After having 2 kids, I think I'm still up at 4 o'clock every morning. So it just depends if they sleep or not. So
You know, I get into Minot and I find out that I'm going to be doing mornings by myself, which was quite mind-blowing because, you know, in San Diego, I worked with 5 other people on the show. But now it's just me. So I felt like when I first got there, I really needed to perform. And the station I was at was an active rock station.
Yep.
And it was hard to find my niche there. And I have to tell you, when I first met you and I started talking to you off the air and I started seeing your work on the AM side, which was literally right across the hall from here to my refrigerator, when I started getting to know your personality, I adored bringing you in and putting you on the air because what I love so much about radio is being spontaneous, is no script unless you do the news, is talking to you about something, not pre-planning it, putting you on the air and having you feed off me. And you were the one person that was so brilliant at coming right back at me, even with my corny jokes. I used to tell everybody, hey, we're over here on the 19th floor, elevator still busted. And Allison one day came running in and she goes, what are you telling people on the phone? I go, what do you mean? There's someone that just complained because they can't find our radio station. They said we're on the 19th floor. And I went, oh, Allison, you really think people, do you guys still have that big building with the M on it in Minot?
So that's getting reconstructed right now, but yes, it's still there.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. So that will be a new landmark. Well, it's always been a landmark, but yeah, the 19th floor, that's the only tallest building.
I ran that by you the first time and you didn't even bat an eye. You played right off it. You said, you said those stairs are really becoming a pain. So now in Bismarck, it's the 12th floor elevator still.
Okay, and I know we had an elevator guy. I just forgot his name, but there was another guy that we knew really well, Gus, right? Gus?
He was my intern, and only because I needed someone to feed off me besides you. And really, if you paid attention to Charlie Brown episodes, Gus was actually the voice of the teacher.
Yeah, he just wasn't radio ready yet, but he was a good intern to get you coffee and stuff.
He's working in Botano now. I don't know what he's doing out there, but he's out in Botano.
And for everybody listening, it was just so much fun to feed off each other. And we did sports together, talked about football, who's going to win, who's going to lose. It was a great time, and it still is, that those memories. But it kind of stinks, that we can't do that anymore and really feed off each other and all that. But you never say never. You never know what may happen in the future. No doubt about that, right?
I told a coworker here in Bismarck, Andy, which you're going to be putting on soon. Yep. I told her, I said, there's just a few people that I meet instantly, that I know right away. If you were to tell me tomorrow, you guys are doing a morning show, I'd be so excited about it because you had that perfect personality. And I told that to her because she's great too.
Yeah.
You have a quick wit about you, yet you're a news guy. With the deep voice. I'm the deep voice.
I have to do a shout out. I'm Don May. That was up in Minot. So that's how I remember hearing the news every morning going to school was Don May doing it. I'm Don May. So
that's excellent.
Yeah. We worked together for a few, and we were trying to get into this new field, something called podcasting. And I would say this is, I'm not even in radio anymore, and I'm trying to do a new hobby here, podcasting, just because I just love the radio aspect, the interviewing people, talking, getting to know people. But your podcast was very, I guess you would say, emotional and very real more than anything. And can you explain a little bit about the podcast that you developed in Minot and continued in Bismarck a little bit?
Yeah, I think that was my third year in, maybe my second year into Minot, when Allison came up to all of us and said, we want you guys to come up with some ideas for a podcast. And I'm like, what am I? Like, do you want me to team up with someone? She goes, I don't care how you do it. And I go, I don't know what to talk about. And she goes, why don't you talk about recovery? And as soon as she said that, a light bulb went off in my head. As a matter of fact, Kyle, you're the main guy that I need to thank always for putting my graphic together for my There Is a Way Out.
Oh, yes.
The stairs.
Oh, yeah, no problem in it. it was pretty simple overall, but it looked really good how we did it with the stairs. You just gave me the idea, and I'm like, well, let's do it where you're coming out of the stairs and getting into the light and everything. And for everybody out there, you already said the podcast name, but the podcast is called what again, Bromo?
So it's called There Is a Way Out. And the reason why I came up with that idea is just more of a personal feeling, is because I just reached Friday was my 14th sobriety year.
Wow.
My birthday, as we call it, my favorite day of the year. I could care less about my birth date.
Yep.
But 2/17/09, which is my tattoo right here. I finally got a tattoo, Kyle. I know that's kind of so unlike me, but that's the date in the triangle.
Yep.
I came up with this There Is a Way Out because I wanted people to know that anybody, no matter what state of mind they're in, if you think that you are destined to never grow or never recover, there is a way out. And I started my podcast. And how long have you been doing your podcast for?
Not long. You know, it was more of a development to get ready for like 2 or 3 months with graphics and everything. And then I would say in the last month has been more the interviews and, you know, just building up the interviews to release them on a, I don't know, weekly, bi-weekly basis. I think it's whatever life allows me to release, you know, just because of kids and work.
Well, you're
and
a lot more busier than I am. Yeah, you're busy. You know, as you know, it's a pretty fascinating process of a podcast because I was able to use my story. And when I talk about a story, I was able to talk from how I was in my early stages of drinking, how I became an alcoholic, how out of control I became. And then I started talking about how the parts where I went into recovery and went into two different recovery homes. And I talk about experiences there all the way up until present day. And then I started putting guests on when I got more involved in my podcast. But it was very therapeutic for me, for one. And I never thought anybody would really, you know, is someone really going to listen to this depressing 45 minutes of somebody's own story? And then I started getting some really nice messages to me that they passed it on to a family member and they listened to it and they could relate to it. And that to me is the greatest compliment of all. If anybody can tell me later that they're still sober after hearing me speak. I used to speak when I lived in San Diego at AA meetings, and I would speak for about 55 minutes, which seems like a long time. And it is when you're in front of a bunch of people. But when you're talking about your experience and you're trying to tell people your story and how you got sober and what you're doing now is the most valuable things you can tell anybody. And so when I was listening to my podcast afterwards, you know, I thought to myself, you know what, this isn't a bad thing. I'm going to keep it going. And Allison was able to let me record mine in the Rock Studio using the old recorder, the MP3 or whatever you call it, the editor thing. And I had on numerous guests, and I had it all the way up until I was let go.
And, you know, at that experience of Allison giving you the opportunity to really, you know, just be real with everybody. And I think that realism, and if you have not listened to his podcast, I highly recommend definitely listen to it. It is very powerful. And it was just, you know, crazy that we were, you know, releasing these podcasts, and yours from Minut was just climbing the charts, in my opinion, because we always got the weekly reports, and it was just because it was so real, and it was I mean, it's really good. And I think I
appreciate that, Kyle.
Yeah,
thank you.
No, and you could tell you took the time to tell your story. You said it was therapeutic, and you continued it now in Bismarck a little bit. Is that correct?
So when I moved here to Bismarck, I didn't have that platform anymore, obviously, because I work for a company called Town Square Media. So, you know, I've put together 10 or 11 podcasts of my own that are on Anchor Podcast.
Yep.
You can actually find it if you go on my Facebook page. I have a group page called There Is a Way Out. If anybody wants to look that up, I'd be glad to have you as a member. You don't need to do anything. There's no fees. All you have to do is just be supportive. You can find my podcast there.
it's one of those things where the interviews you had and then your story and it was your support kind of Facebook group that you had, that it was not just related to alcoholism. It was also related to other type of, I guess, addictions and mental health and everything, correct?
I've invited anybody and whoever that needs support to go on there because everybody supports everybody. Here's the thing. If you go to an AA meeting, there's several people in AA that only agree that you should only go to AA if you're an alcoholic, and you should go to NA meetings if you're into drugs. You know what? Anybody that goes to an AA or an NA meeting that wants to stay sober, I am okay with. The main point is addiction, and the main point is if you're not ready to surrender, not 98%, I mean 100%. If you're not ready, you're not ready, and nobody can really help you out. My higher power, which is God, helped me in that way, and I was able to see by going to meetings and learning and listening to people talk. So to answer your question in a very long-winded answer, my platform is really geared towards anybody. I'm not an expert with mental health, but I can't even grasp what that must be like for those that suffer from that. I can't even imagine that. I can't.
And it must have been a challenge for you to really, get to that 100%. But that's why the meetings are there, to really come out and talk about it, to get to the next step. And I have to applaud you, though. 14 years. Congratulations. That is a huge achievement. And each year, I think, is a huge achievement, no doubt. So congratulations on 14 years, Bromo. I mean, you got so much feedback based on your Facebook when you posted that and everything, and we're rooting for you every single day and for everybody out there. I
appreciate that.
Yeah. And
the funny thing is, Kyle, I have two hands, okay? One's my left, one's my right. You're a married man. If I show you this, some people say to me, "Are you married?" First of all, that's usually a guy that asks me that, because no woman ever pays attention if I'm married or not. It's a sobriety ring. It's got the a tree on it, and inside it's got the AAC saying in it. So sometimes I have to explain to people, no, I'm not married. It won't fit on this finger because I broke this finger, my ring finger, in golf years ago, so it won't fit there. Another reason why my best friend is my idol, who I look up to, is because, now remember when I was in San Diego, he and I used to go out and golf and take listeners out, and he and I drank a lot, and he and I drank, and then I went off on my path, and then several years later, there was a point where a decision had to be made in his life, and guess what? He's now 10 years sober. Isn't that something? So when I see him about once a year. We go out and we still golf, we play cards, we play poker, we smoke cigars, but we have no desire to drink. And it's, the first time I remember seeing him after all those years, when I got back out of recovery, and I hadn't seen him in a long time. And see, I left the show in a bad way. I just disappeared. I was on that show for 10 years, and one day I wasn't on anymore. And people in San Diego started wondering, where's Bromo at? Where's Bromo at? But my friend protected my anonymity and didn't tell anybody where I was at. But he was hurt. I hurt a lot of people down there because I chose the bottle over anything else. My family, my career, I chose the bottle, and the bottle will always win. And the first time I saw him, after years and years and years, after not talking, after disappointing him, after him choosing his right path, I was worried, because I was like, I wonder if we're going to be okay. Will there be any friction? Remember, we're both sober now. And when I saw him, it was just like, how it is, Kyle, when you see a best friend of yours that you click so well with, nothing changed except for the fact that we didn't need to drink anymore. Isn't that amazing? That
is amazing. And man, your story, I would say, is super interesting, and I'm glad you're telling it here today to everybody out there. But I would have to say again, I encourage everybody who's listening this podcast is definitely check out Bromo's podcast. There is a way out. Congratulations, Bromo, 14 years.
Oh, thanks.
Props.
So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So that was probably the deepest part of this podcast, because you have so many more stories, no doubt about that, because now 14 years of sobriety and just, living your life and get to try new things. The one thing with the audiovisual podcast here on this podcast, we talk about creativity. And I would say being in radio, you can be creative in multiple ways. It's more not just audio based now, but it's now more social media based and stuff like that. But you always have come up with creative stuff all the time on your shows. And I guess what is one of your most creative things, or how do you come up with some of this stuff? Just because I remember you in the mornings, it was just awesome to hear some of the stuff you were doing.
It's different. Yeah. Well, a lot of what you said, social media, on my Facebook page, on our station's Facebook page, we have something called Bromo Billboard, where I just pose a simple question every single weekday, and that's nothing big deal.
Yeah.
A lot of what I do during my 8 to 1 shift is really music driven. I'm not given a lot of time to do any funny bits or anything like that. I'll tell you what has changed since I left iHeart, and you know this, is our company is very driven when it comes to social media and writing stories. And some people call them blogs, we call them stories.
Yep.
And we have to post those on our pages, which gets shared by our 4 other radio stations. And, people might come up to me now and say, what do you do for a living? Bromo. Well, I'm a writer. Oh, do you? Do you work for the Bismarck Tribune? No, I work for a radio station. Well, what do you mean a writer? I'll tell you why, because we spend a lot of time now writing stories. And I'm not a great writer. I've had to learn to write this, write that, to quote, to do it right way, and not get sued for plagiarism. And, now I use a lot of my, I try to use a lot of my creativity into writing stories 5 days a week. And the stories are supposed to be, and they are local, Bismarck, North Dakota, Minot, Minnesota, and that's it. And I'm telling you, sometimes it's hard to come up with something to write about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that does make sense. And that is another thing, it's one of those things radio has changed with trying to be local with the radio stations and your social media, your website. It's very driven these days, where you really want to try to focus on those things. And they all connect, though. The website, the social media, the radio station show that you're on, they all work together in tandem to make a great product, I guess you would say, in that sense.
Yeah, we try. Yeah, definitely.
And that's awesome that your creativity is coming out in a different way, and it's a new skill that you could use in the future, no matter what, for that. And I've read many of your stories, as you say, for that, blog post stories, it's whatever people want to call them. But I would say everybody has a unique style, not just for broadcast, but for writing. And you can always tell if somebody has a unique writing aspect too for each person. So it's really good to get new skills, I guess, for creativity, would you say?
I think what you just said, you hit it right on the head. I think that every personality in my building that writes has a very unique way of expressing themselves. And it's so true. We don't have a very big building, and we don't have a whole lot of people in our building. But the people that we do have there have their own niche on what they like to write about. I kind of like to get into the personal stories. I like to go on a social media group on Facebook and try to find someone that lost their dog for 3 weeks, or someone that just had an operation. I know it's kind of sappy, but I really enjoy getting a hold of that person and interviewing them and then writing about it. And then watching the story develop. It does. Sometimes they don't do. Sometimes those personal stories don't do very well as far as getting the digital numbers. If I can interview someone that maybe in my field who's been sober a year and talks about what it was like, how bad their life was, if I can convey that in an article, and it's okay with them. I love doing that. You know what I mean? You know what clickbait is, and you're a pro at finding.
I am not.
Let me tell you something. I'll give you an example. You've heard of Newsbreak, right?
Yes. Okay.
I saw something on Newsbreak that said, number one drafty of Pittsburgh, dead. And I went, I follow sports a little bit, and I went, oh my God, they lost blah, blah. And I went on there, and it was their number one draftee back in 55.
So clickbait.
See what I mean?
Yep.
So at first you think, wow, they sure got me. And then everybody writes in clickbait. But it was what they partially said was true. It was their number one draft pick in 55. Mm-hmm. However, they left that part out in the title.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm not a pro at clickbait, and nor do I actually like clickbait. I don't try to come up with a clever title that will be either raunchy or crass or anything like that, or so clever that somebody might go, "What is he talking about?"
Yep.
So I'm not good in that department. Does that make sense?
Yep. No, it makes perfect sense. And yeah, clickbait is probably one of the most annoying things, and that does happen. They're telling just half the truth, and then when you click on it, you get the rest of the truth. But that's what drives numbers. Oh, what happened? And it's what happens, but it's also the personal aspect, the stories that you get, and that's awesome to hear that you get some of those personal stories, and that's what I like to do here, I guess, with the podcast, is definitely just get some of those personal stories too. So it's always fun to be creative in some way or form and try to get those interviews. So appreciate it,
let me ask you,
yeah.
Let me ask you this: do you go back and look at some of your past podcasts and say, you know what, I'm doing better there, or you know what, let me try this on my next podcast? I'm sure you're picking them apart like crazy, right?
Yes.
Do you give yourself the right props that you should and go, great job, I hope?
Well, some stuff, yes, I would say that. But Allison and we talked about this a little bit. And of course, I interviewed her a little bit already. And she's like, you're going to have a goal of 80 episodes. I'm like, 80 episodes? And she's like, I'm excited to watch to see what happens from your first episode to your 80th episode. And it's one of those things where I think right now is more of learning aspect, trying to get everything figured out, and then maybe once 10 episodes are done, that is a thing to really dive into, is like, what can I do for the next 10, and then the next 10, and then the next 10. I think it's just little by little, have little goals to make what you want to do, what you want to become. And I think that could be said not just for podcast aspect, it could be said for any career or any hobby or anything like that too, or any goal overall. So yeah, I would say I do pick apart a lot of stuff. I'm probably my worst critic, no doubt on that. So, but yeah, that's, you hit the nail on the head on that too.
Well, listen, every time you bring up Allison, I have such a warm feeling for her, because I could not hear from her for a long, long time, which is just how life goes.
Normal,
we get busy.
yep.
And she's so busy, but she's doing every single job that there is, and that's how she used to be when I was there. But I'll remember once I was really feeling kind of low, and it was my dad's birthday, and he's been gone now for about 3 years. And it was my dad's birthday just recently, November 10th. And she reached out to me on Facebook because she wrote that number down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and she remembers just you think it's just the minor details, but they're not minor to her or for anything like that. And yeah, we could just make this whole podcast about Allison and not even have Allison on the podcast. So
I know. I had so much respect for her, because she would go to bat. She would be the only one out there in the blizzard of the century, and she'd be driving around picking people up. I know where I'm going. I know these roads.
Oh, my goodness. Well, we've been talking a little bit here now, just going back and forth with your career, podcast, and everything. But just to wrap all this podcast up here, this episode, we were talking a little bit about, Gus, our good old buddy Gus at the station. But one thing I want to talk a little bit about, just because for fun, is, well, two things here, is you're a cat owner, right? Tell us about your kitties.
Well, so I have one that I when I moved to Fargo, one of my first goals was, I had a roommate, but one of my goals was I wanted to get a cat, just because, I was all by myself and this and that. Mm-hmm. And one day I go into work in Castleton, and the guy, one of the partners from the show, says, "You still looking for a cat?" I said, "I am." And he goes, "Well, here's an address. Go over to this apartment building, and the guy that the maintenance guy is going to take you into the room, and I want you to meet this cat. Like, what am I supposed to do? Go, hi, I'm Bromo. How are you? Good to see you. And so I go in to meet this cat, and this poor thing was all by itself because and at the end of the month, the cat was going to be taken to the pound because her owner had just robbed a bank and was sentenced to prison. And so the cat had no owner. So I inherited the cat and called her Felon, F-E-L-O-N, get it, which spells felon. But more, so I call her Felon for Morby. So she was with me from Fargo. Okay. To Minot, and then right before I had left iHeart, Thanksgiving, I went over to a friend's house for dinner, and someone was on Facebook going, look at this poor thing. And I reached out to a guy who was ironically a friend of mine on Facebook page, and he had rescued a tiny little kitten right there on the slow lane next to Max on a super, super, super cold night. The cat was almost frozen on the side of the road. And he had picked it up and he put it next to his heater down below, and he took it to Souris Valley Animal Shelter. And he took all these pictures, and so I went in and I said, I want to put my name on that list. Nobody claimed the cat, and the cat's been with me ever since. Her name is, this tells you how much of an ego I have. Her name is Bromita.
Bromita.
Bromita
or Brahmita or whatever it is, right?
He has one eyeball that was destroyed. I don't know what happened, whether a bird or something slashed at her and they had to take the eyeball out, so she's got one eye out. And those are my two cats, Felon and Bromita.
Love it. And then one more question. We always talked a little bit about games, video games, anything like that. What kind of games do you like to play? Are you just focused on like some of the single player ones more than anything, would you say?
Yeah, always. I told you my philosophy from the day that you and I met. I will not, and I don't go online to play a shooter game because I don't want some 7-year-old kid in Alaska talking crap to me as he's clobbering me behind a rock. I want to play just by myself. I don't need to get all geared up. Hey, you see that guy over there? And, I don't need to play the same map over it. So just recently I'm playing Dead Space. Remember when that game first came out years ago?
And they have the remastered one now. So
Yeah. The trend now is all these games are remastered.
Yes, I know. And they get more money for it. They sell it for the same price that they sold it for 20 years ago, 10 years ago.
And, it's basically the same game, except it looks very, very good, and it's more polished. But it's still, I remember, same thing. I remember playing this years and years ago. So, yeah, I do play video games, but I got to tell you though, Kyle, back in the old days, that was all I did. When I drank and I got off work, I would come home and play video games and drink and then pass out. I got to tell you, with my job out here in Bismarck, with writing and all that stuff, I get home around 5:30. I'm so tired. And look at, I'm telling you, and you have 2 kids, I'm so tired. All I could do is come home, plant my rear end on the couch, make something to eat, go out and have a cigar out on my patio. Before I know it, I go to bed. I only play on the weekends now. Isn't that a tragedy?
No. Well, I'm glad you get some me time and time to relax a little bit from everything, from all the hubbub from the kiddies and all that. So, one last question here, Bromo, before we wrap it up is there anything else you would like to add to anything from your podcast to your journey in radio to your cats or video games?
Well, I think you can agree with this on a couple of points here because you've had experience. It's funny. I come across people at a job like there's this place out here called Borrowed Bucks. You probably heard about it, and they just recently called it quits and shut their doors down after like almost 30 years. I remember coming across a guy that worked there, a DJ inside there, and I remember him saying, "What do you do?" "Oh, you're one of the guys from the..." "Yeah, I'm one of the guys on the radio station." "Oh, I don't go. I wanted to go into radio, but radio's dying. Radio's dead." He told me this 2 years ago. Radio's a dead thing. I don't believe so. I really don't. And I'm still in it because I love it so much. I want to tell people that if they are ever interested in a career of broadcasting, now is the time to pursue it, because I remember people used to tell me back in the day, oh, college, you got to go to broadcasting school, you got to do this, you got to do that. Man, I've never seen so many people nowadays get into the radio with, you don't have to go to broadcasting school, especially behind a tanning salon like I did. If you really love radio and you are fascinated by what it can bring you, like Kyle and I opening up the mic with no script, talking off and I know a lot of consultants would disagree with that kind of radio and say, listen, that's bad radio. You guys are chewing up minutes. You could play another song for the 1 millionth time. But if you are so engaged with another person and the personality comes out over the air, your own personality, and you start having people recognize that, it's quite the cool thing about the job. And I do want to say this about sobriety and about addiction. No matter what kind of stage you're in, if somebody is watching this or someone's thinking to themselves, wow, I sure drink a lot, or boy, I find myself drinking every single day, you can go on Google and you can type in a simple do I drink too much test, and they'll give you a series of questions that are pretty solid. And if you do think that you may have some issues, I know for me, I never wanted anyone to tell me to go to an AA meeting. It used to scare the heck out of me and bore me quite a bit. But if you're ever curious about your own drinking and your own sobriety, never ever fear about checking it out, because I'm telling you, I lived that life of drinking and living like a rock star and having people buy me drinks and shots and having women only want to go out with me because I was promo and I was a public figure. But I got to tell you, if you were to take that life back then and measure it up to the life I have now, there is just no comparison. I mean, being sober and doing what I love to do and having my life back in my own terms is the greatest feeling. And being able to go on a podcast from Kyle, that's the greatest compliment I could ever ask. I was telling my best friend, Kyle, since he retired, he's part-time with the company because they're allowing him to do podcasts. Yeah. So he laughed at me and he goes, look at you, big shot, because I told him I was going on your podcast tonight. And he goes, look at you, big shot.
You know what?
Yeah.
I'm enjoying what this kind of radio side is of podcasting, because it could be considered radio if you think about it. Podcasting can be. So,
of course. Oh, absolutely.